Now, it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that when at a reenactment, we're not actually firing real bullets at one another. What we do is just pour a bunch of powder down the bottom of the barrel, prime it, and what we fire out is just a bunch of, well, loose powder, a bit of smoke and fire. It looks really good for the crowd, but there's one thing that is very distinctly off about it when compared to an actual engagement, which is to say, the sound that the gun makes. When you fire a real bullet, you get much more of a cracking noise. It's very smart, it's very martial, very good. When you're firing just loose powder, you get more of a thwomping noise, which is overall much less impressive and doesn't really get across the real force that these things can really pack. So let's just fire a blank round so we can see that. Ready? Left and fire. Another important thing, remove this. Prepare to fire. Much more of a thwomping noise, a lot less impressive. Let's move on to the way that they do it over in Europe, which is that they actually do put a bit of paper down the barrel, and then they actually do use the ramrods, which, if you tried that at a North American reenactment, odds are they would be rather aghast at the horrible lack of safety, but I suppose over in Europe they like to have a bit more fun, so let's try that. Now, like I said, over in Europe, they tend to have a little bit more fun with it, by which I mean they have a bit more lax safety regulations, at least in some ways, but that's the topic for another day. We actually fire with the paper wadding down the barrel, so you would load, as you would normally at a reenactment, the paper down, but instead of throwing the paper down, they put it down the barrel, actually use a ramrod to put it down, and then we fire, so a bit of flaming paper could come out the other end, but that's about it. You get a bit more of a cracking noise, but still not nearly as impressive as a real round, so we'll see what that sounds like here. Bit better, not nearly enough to really inspire fear in the enemy. And both of those are in very stark contrast to when you actually have a ball loaded into the musket. Of course, much like when there was a paper in there, it's going to be a lot louder, a lot more of a sharp crack, but it's just overall a lot more dramatic, and there's a great deal more kick, of course, when there's actually something in the gun, so you can see that now. Thank you. On one more thing, I'm not a very good marksman, so don't expect anything to happen. If you want anything to actually happen, go over to British muzzleloaders or any of those people. Right then. And firing. Told you. You may have also been able to notice the much greater amount of recoil that I faced in that last round, as evidenced quite well, I think, by the increased shakiness of the GoPro camera. So now that all of those are out of the way, let's look at all three shots in succession so we might more easily compare them. Just to put on further display the sheer firepower, the force of these weapons when fired, here's some footage of it actually hitting its mark. This shot was taken by my uncle against a rather unfortunate-looking cinder block. And if you look closely, you can actually see the shot bouncing back from the cinder block and bouncing along the ground, yes, indeed, back towards us, so not exactly our smartest move there, not one that we shall be repeating. And here you can see the result of what it actually did to the cinder block, resulting in a rather deep and much more smooth gash than I would have expected. As you can see here, however, the table that we were firing against earlier, and in a much more safe fashion, I admit, did not fare nearly so well. You can see the entry hole here is actually rather perfectly round. It just sort of punched a hole straight on through, but when you look at the back of the table, the wood is far more splintered and rough, so you can imagine the sort of nasty business that a round would actually get up to when, well, inside of a person. And here you can see the result of many other shots, which you can see have skid into the ground and actually managed to bounce right back up before continuing to bounce really along the ground before going into the woods there. It is precisely the same sort of technique that they used to use with cannon way back in the 18th and early 19th centuries, of actually bouncing the cannonball along the ground, you know, over top one's own forces to collide into an enemy line. See, the musket ball, being effectively really just a smaller cannon shot, has something of the same principles. You know, I really have to wonder how many men suffered from leg wounds as a result of this sort of thing, you know, the rounds bouncing along the ground, as opposed to torso wounds, especially when you get further behind the lines, perhaps in more rear ranks or in reserve companies. So there we have it, everyone. I may not be the greatest of marksmen in the field, but at least I am, and I shall remain, of course, my dear viewer, your most humble and obedient of servants.